debate. I'm very happy to have Mr. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki with us. Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Witam serdecznie również panią minister klimatu i środowiska. Objęła pani niedawno swój resort w takim wyjątkowo trudnym okresie negocjowania właśnie tych trudnych rozporządzeń w ramach pakietu Fit for 55 i też bardzo dziękuję za pani obecność.
Thank you for your presence as well. And I wish you good luck in this difficult mission. Welcome to Piotr Pyzik, Deputy Minister of National Assets, who is with us online. I know that Thursday will be very important for Silesia and for the mining sector. It's about negotiations, so I'm especially happy to have you with us. Welcome to my colleagues from the European Parliament, Professor Ryszard Legutko, co-chairman of the Group of European Conservatives and Reformists, which is the organizer of today's meeting. Welcome to Professor Zdzisław Krasnodębski, Deputy Chairman of the Committee of Research, Development of Industry at the European Parliament, as well as especially warmly welcome Aleksandrę Vondra, the member of the European Parliament, who is our dear friend, dear colleague, and very close to us in Poland, but who also is very much involved in the European Parliament in issues related to environmental protection. He is our main coordinator of these issues in the ENVI Commission. I would also like to welcome our guest from the European Commission, who will be listening to this debate intently. I think it's important. What we say today is important for the Commission as well, so I would like to welcome Vicente Hurtado Roa, who in the European Commission is the chief, let's say, designer of this regulation about CBAM, and he knows everything about it. Welcome to our experts. We have commissioned two very important expert opinions here at the University of Economics in Katowice and in the Central Mining Institute. And I would like to welcome the representation, Professor Krzysztof Stańczyk from the Central Mining Institute and Marcin Baron from the University of Economics, a colleague who will take the floor in the second part of the conference, presenting the findings of their research. Welcome to all MPs, senators, all those from local authorities, mayors of cities and towns. Welcome to the world of economics, who will listen intently to what the speakers are going to say today. And welcome to Dominik Kolos, the head of the Silesian and Dąbrowa Solidarity Movement. I'm happy to have you with us as well, sir. This conference will be divided into two parts. In the first part, let's say political part, we will have politicians together with Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, and part two will belong to experts. Of course, between these two parts, I will ask for any remarks and proposals from the floor. And now, I would like to ask Mr. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and Madam Minister Moskwa to take the floor. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Prime Minister, please, and Madam Minister, please, over here. We are ready to start the debate. Mr. Prime Minister, CBAM, the climate package, new climate package, the regulation, all these are very important and potent and difficult topics. What are your first remarks as to what the role of CBAM should be? Can it impact positively the growth of the European Union, or do we have any risks related to it? Mr. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. I would like to start by thanking Izabela Kloc for organizing this forum, because the discussion on bringing our positions together is an important step towards the right approach in the European Union, joint approach. But we are interested especially in how, in these difficult times, in terms of the climate policy, but also in light of all the plans that the European Union has, what is the place of the Polish industry, the Polish energy consuming industry, what is its role here. So thank you again. Welcome to Madam Minister and all the ministers present with us here, Mr. and Mrs. MPs, the chairman of the Silesian Dąbrowskie Solidarity, and all the members and participants of this meeting. CBAM, so the carbon border adjustment mechanism, can on the one hand equalize the opportunities of European industries, but on the other hand we hear already today that all those who are importers of steel, some of them use steel in the production of various commodities, products, and even services, that all those will have a more difficult situation ahead of them. So on the one hand, this levels the playing field, as you say, in the EU, and it creates better conditions for competition for steel manufacturers, for manufacturers of other products which are in more difficult situations than Chinese or American manufacturers. But on the other hand, we hear that because of that, the competitiveness of certain sectors of the European economy will be weakened. So I'm looking at these problems more from a pragmatic aspect than from an ideological standpoint. The climate policy is overfilled with ideology. Sure, it's hard to discuss whether with the biggest proponents of the immediate, as quick as possible policy of climate neutrality, as well as with those who are on the other side, who say that we should not take up any measures related to climate policy at all. I think both groups are like two extremes, but our path, the path of Poland and the path of Polish industry, should be along the middle. So we should make use of what will be the best for us from the point of view of climate policy. At the same time, we should respond to the challenges related to climate and policy, but we should do this in a way so as to maintain the biggest number of jobs possible in this transforming industry. One general thought that always comes to my mind with this difficult discussion, which has, like 5-10 years ago, which has been imported, let's say, to us. A thought that accompanies me is a very, let's say, precise, not a general, but a very precise one, and I would like to share it with you. Poland spends for an import of energy-consuming resources between 50 and 80 billion zlotys. Let's stay with this amount for a moment. It's huge. Import of oil, gas, and coal. For that, we spend huge amounts for import. So we're paying from our money to Russia, Saudi Arabia, Norway, and other countries, huge sums of money exceeding what we receive from the EU in terms of net amounts. Why am I stressing this at the beginning? Wouldn't it be wonderful from the point of view of Polish economy and Polish society if we were independent of these resources, if we could run our policy based on sovereign Polish-dependent resources? I think that's a rhetoric question. The entire European Union imports energy resources, also in a huge amount, paying a total of around $300 billion. That's 550 billion cubic meters of gas, which is consumed in the European Union, out of which 330 billion cubic meters is imported, from which 210 billion from Russia. And in this, in the oil balance, we have even bigger numbers, 650 up to 500 imported, out of which 150 from Russia, in billions of tons. So we have a huge deficit in trade of resources. We ourselves finance regimes, let's say, quote unquote, which we don't necessarily like that they're so rich. So from that perspective, my thesis would be that it is in our best interest to get rid of this meta-dependence. Sovereignty, independence will involve becoming independent on that meta-dependence, not only related to gas, which we hear so much about, but the one which costs 5-10 times more fossil fuels or oil, including. So, there's such introduction. I can say that for us, this dilemma related to carbon border adjustment mechanism, to this border tax, depends on what its final shape will be, whether we will have allowances maintained for energy-consuming industries, whether the money will go to Poland, to Poles, so that we could allocate them for energy-consuming industries and sectors, or less energy-consuming industry, but for their transformation towards decreasing energy consumption. Will we be able to depreciate the social costs of such a big change, transformative change? These are the questions, as a politician, as the Prime Minister, I have to pose, because depending on the responses to those questions, on the criteria, on the criteria for CBAM, on that, our final decisions will depend, the decisions of the government of the Republic of Poland regarding the final support or not. We cannot agree for Poland to bear excessive cost of energy transformation. Will I have the opportunity to take the floor later on? Or should I say everything I want to say right now? That's your decision, Mr. Prime Minister. Okay, so I'll stop now, and then I'll come back and comment a few other issues related to climate policy. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Prime Minister mentioned this crucial element of ETS. Unfortunately, the European Commission announces that together with the introduction of CBAM, it will want to eliminate those free allowances as for CO2. That's why my question goes to Madam Minister, how we are preparing for this battle.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, for having invited me here, Mr. Prime Minister, Mrs. MPs, Mr. Voivod, honorable ladies and gentlemen. We are meeting here today in order to talk about CBAM. It seems to be the only single document, one single solution, one new and seemingly, at first glance, positive tax. What Mr. Prime Minister said, we must not look at this solution only from the perspective of a single tool, but from the perspective of the whole ETS reform and from the perspective of the whole FIT, with full awareness that it is one comprehensive solution. And looking today already at what is hidden in the second bottom of CBAM, because as far as mobilization of other states who in an unjust way using climate-wise and economically, are making use of what they can obtain from poorer and slower developing countries, demands balancing, and these are solutions we will definitely be supporting, provided they will not reduce competitiveness of our companies. Whereas the second background to this solution is the idea for automatically withdraw those free ETSs. Well, we simply do deserve them, and we must not agree so simply that something which is not ready today, not worked out in details, to replace the existing solution. And at the same time, we must be fully aware that CBAM is an element of the whole ETS or the whole system of trading, which has been in place for years in the EU. And here we are touching, coming to an important moment. I think the next meeting will be about this. I mean, focusing on ETS as such only. And as of today, the trade and the whole ETS system has become a sort of currency operating in a completely uncontrollable way within the EU. Financial institutions increased their share from 21 to 27% within the year, which shows that European institutions do not have full control over the system. We as Poland have filed an application to check, to verify that market of potential speculations and checking potential mechanisms of control which are either insufficient or simply non-existent. And if the system keeps developing like this, our companies will be dependent on buying certificates from entities unknown to us, and therefore the CBAM can be an opportunity for good discussion over the whole system of authorization on our certificates and on the place of our companies within this whole system, as well as in the whole FIT system. And the ambition and task for our ministry is for the whole dialogue to be carried out in a responsible way, and in a way digging deeper into all details so that every solution is parameterized in time, but also in good financial instruments which in introducing new ambitions should always accompany. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Yes, definitely we need a very strong cooperation now among all actors interested in ETSs and CBAM. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please allow us to move on to the group of EU MPs who are getting connected to us. And first, let me ask the main organizer of our meeting, Professor Ryszard Legutko, co-chairman of the group of European Conservatives and Reformers, who has his input for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, the climate policy of the European Union has led to certain negative phenomena, one of which is so-called carbon leakage. We all know what this is about. The energy-consuming industry is leaving the European Economic Area and moving production to countries where there are smaller requirements on environmental protection. This leads to decrease of investments, EU competitiveness, EU economic competitiveness, and on the other hand increases the global level of emission. The European market has become dependent on products which are cheaper because they were manufactured without climate levies. Now we feel ourselves the effects of this. The huge problems are experienced by the European automotive industry because we lack the semiconductors manufactured in Asia, and moreover China has recently decreased the production of magnesium. What this means is even bigger delays in manufacturers of cars and further price increases. The automotive industry is the most spectacular, yet not the only example of the weak resilience of the EU economy to crises, which we have had an abundance of in recent times. The European Union is trying to counteract the negative effects of the emission. One of the preventive measures should be the topic of today's debate, so-called carbon border adjustment mechanism. In the media, CBAM functions under a simplified name of tax or customs on carbon footprint. Well, some people have high hopes with it, others warn against its catastrophic impact on the EU and global economy. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the middle, but I would say that today's conference, I hope it will help in search for optimal solutions for CBAM. I wish you fruitful debates. Thank you, Mr. Professor. And now, let me ask Alexander Vondra, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, right now European Parliament member, who, from the European Conservatives and Reformists, is responsible for climate and climate economy. Mr. MP, I would like to ask a main question, let's say, to you. Is the CBAM tax, is it a risk of a world trade war?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and you can see me, and thanks for inviting me to the floor. The question, whether it would result in a trade war, I think this is the key question. And to answer that, I think we have to press the European Commission as well as other European authorities to respond those questions, and they did not do this yet. So no doubts that this issue is very important for us. Ideologically, I am conservative in the social affairs, and I'm liberal in the economy. So I believe that as much as free trade is the best for us, it's the best, the way to get the cheap good to the customers. And at the same time, no doubts that Poland, the Czech Republics, that our starting positions in terms of decarbonization are somewhere else than in the most of the Western European countries. So we all know that the industries of our countries, as seen by the European Commissions, are dirty and must undergo a radical transformation. However, even in Brussels, they know that not all sectors are capable of this transformation in the same way and at the same time. And if they push too hard, the only result will be that some production will leave Europe. So from this point of view, the idea of introducing CBAM is quite logical and makes sense that importers from countries that do not have a similar system to the EU ETS pay a surcharge corresponding to the price of an adequate number of emission allowances. But there are also many cons. First of all, there is the issue whether the CBAM is compliant with the WTO rules. So far, I don't have received any satisfactory answer. The Commission has based its argument on the mantra that CBAM should not be a customs measure, but a climate measure. And in order for everyone to understand this, Parliament has promised that the business in question would lose free allowances to which it is entitled today during a transitional period of 10 years, so that there would not be no risk of receiving double support. But isn't this approach proof that the Commission itself is not sure about the introduction of the CBAM? I recall that trade wars can really affect the EU and therefore our countries in very sensitive sectors that have no direct link to energy-intensive industries, such as the car industry. And then there is another problem with CBAM, is how to calculate the amount of surcharges, especially in countries that will declare that they have introduced a system similar to the EU ETS. How do we verify that this actually happened? Where do we get the pouvoir? Rather, the academic question is what happens if the price of carbons in the EU is lower than elsewhere in the world? Would that mean that the EU would have to pay importers for these countries? And I think our ECR group have two special concerns here. First, we believe that EU should first and foremost try to have a common understanding with the US as to how carbon leakage should be addressed. We welcome that there is the Trade and Technology Council with the US, yet the dialogue and cooperation on this particular matter must be stepped up urgently. And at the same time, or furthermore, there is also the issue of robustness of the data collection from notably non-market economies such as China, with less reliable data sets, is of particular concern to our group. And this concern must be reflected in the report which is being done. And so, personally, I believe that CBAM, as proposed in July, has a potential to do more harm than good so far. The red light also flashes because France, a country with a long protectionist tradition, is eminently interested in early introduction of CBAM. So I think first, one cannot agree with any acceleration of phasing in of CBAM, nor with a broader scope without an additional prior new impact assessment. We need an impact assessment. And secondly, we are very concerned about the impact on the EU competitiveness of phasing out of free allowances for energy-intensive industry within the EU. This must be done in a smart way. We should absolutely avoid that state-of-art and clean European energy-intensive industries lose competitiveness following the full application of CBAM. So, to sum up, as a conservative, I think that we should only make a change if they can make a good difference and fix something that doesn't work. And CBAM is to decide in the future of free allowances and therefore the existence of our industry, then I would rather vote for free allowances against the CBAM. Thank you very much.
Ja bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. And indeed, Mr. Euro MP has asked many important questions. So let me carry on with this question to Professor Krasnodębski. So right now we have the pilot stage of the CBAM prepared. What happens if it has a negative impact on the European industry? What impact will we have on the Commission? Because it was the Commission who will be able to expand it onto further sectors. How, what do you, Mr. Professor, think? Will we be able to handle the European Commission not to have a negative impact? Thank you very much for the invitation, Madam MP. Let me start with some general remarks. First, we're talking about a draft, a certain project from the European Commission. The final shape of this regulation pertaining to CBAM will depend on two institutions So the European Parliament, co-executors of the regulation, the European Parliament usually makes some of the conditions even more stringent. But we need to here remember the role of Madam MP, who will be the rapporteur here, and she will participate in the determination of the position of the European Parliament. She will have an impact on that. So the final shape of this regulation depends on negotiations, as we all think will last long and will not be that easy. So that's my first remark. Secondly, we've heard certain opinions of critique, important ones from the WTO. We've heard critical opinions also. John Kerry has voiced his critical opinion on this, and this critique is for certain economic protectionism, combined with the idea that the Prime Minister said that of strategic autonomy of the European Union. But there is some doubt and worry that our trade partners who are reporting critical remarks, that they will negatively opinion the project. The second critical element is some fear against red tape, so bureaucratization of the entire process. And thirdly is the removal of free allowances, and there's some deep worry among exporters. For example, the German chemical industry has reacted quite negatively to the proposal of the Commission and is putting forward its postulates. As Mr. Vondra mentioned, the Commission itself is very careful with regard to CBAM and this pilot stage. Madam MP is asking what you can expect after the pilot phase is over. If we read the text, we see that the Commission is announcing the expansion of the application of the regulation. Let me just quote, before the transitional period, the Commission will submit to the European Parliament a report on the execution of the regulation, and if needed, it will present a legislative motion to expand CBAM onto other products than those listed in Annex 1, and potentially onto other allowances, and will present other possibilities of changes to make the functioning of CBAM more efficient. So we see that this is also the objective of this pilot phase. In another fragment, we read that the Commission gathers necessary information to expand the scope of application of this regulation. So we're also talking about those other types of emissions or allowances. So undeniably, the goal of introducing this mechanism is to replace free allowances and to expand the entire system. I think that our task as MPs, but also negotiators in the European Council, is to note the dangers and risks related to this regulation, and as my colleagues mentioned, including the fight for Polish interest, and monitoring this pilot stage if this regulation is passed and is entered into force. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Professor. And right now, let me ask Mr. Deputy Minister of National Assets, Piotr Pyzik, to take this onto the, let's say, Polish grounds and to answer what impact can CBAM have on the process of just transition in Poland and in Silesia? Please, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Madam MP. I would like to say hello to the Prime Minister and to the MPs and all participants of this debate, to our guests, and I would like to welcome you accordingly to the positions that you have. Each border adjustment mechanism, this is a proposal of a certain mechanism of adapting the prices of certain imported products with consideration of CO2 emissions. The mechanism should be introduced with January 1st, 2023, but it will be preceded by a 2-year transitional period. The mechanism will apply to certain specific products imported from outside the EU, iron, steel, fertilizers, electricity, and these are the key elements. The objectives declared by the European Commission is to equal the competitiveness of the European Union with regard to other areas which do not have costly obligations imposed on them with regard to GNG emissions, for example. This leads to carbon leakage. This inequality leads to carbon leakage. So taking production outside the EU in order to decrease the cost of its production, which is not favorable, not beneficial from the point of view of the EU, and which questions the mechanism itself. Now, the essence of this levy is to impose on products imported from areas with lower environmental standards onto the European Union territory. The mechanism should lead to a situation in which importers will bear the costs of CO2 emissions at the same amount as an entity manufacturing within the EU. This carbon footprint tax or customs should be a sort of customs imposed on products imported into the EU from outside the European Union, from areas which do not have such a rigorous climate policies. In the context of state treasury companies, to iron, steel, and fertilizers, that's where we will have the impact. As for state treasury companies, they don't necessarily manufacture steel, but like Group Węglokoks, they are the beneficiaries of the products, and we have artificial fertilizers manufactured as well. Introduction of the levy would have a positive impact on their competitiveness. In the postulates of the European Commission regarding CBAM, we have a provision that saying that this measure was designed according to the World Trade Organization rules and other international obligations, including that of the EU. As to the height of the CO2 emission fees in the EU, that would lead to equalizing the leveling of the products, their product prices with prices of products from outside the EU, and that would have no loss of competitiveness, and that would fit within the mechanism of just transition. Now, what are the reactions of countries from outside the EU? Interestingly, the USA believes that it should be implemented only as a final tool. Brazil, RSA, and China, so countries which cooperate very closely within the areas that we are interested in, have issued a letter with a warning that they are very worried with the introduction of this very one-sided or very one-sided provisions. Turkey announced that they will change the tax on the products. This levy will have, especially for our transition, energy transition, will have a three-dimension impact. Competitiveness of the EU economy, as seen from our businesses. Next, the relative impact on climate. And third, very important, our just transition, especially in Silesia, will be a civilization transition as well, will impact positively the transition in the social aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Here we, anyway, can see a position which is optimistic in relation to CBAM. And now, honorable ladies and gentlemen, I would like to hand over the floor to dear audience guests. I know some people got enlisted, so let me ask Tomasz Heryszek, President of Węglokoks, who is really vividly interested in this tax. 2 minutes. Honorable Mr. Prime Minister, I will do my best to synthetically fit in 120 seconds. Honorable Madam Minister, Honorable Madam Chairman, all dear honorable guests, I'm very glad. First of all, I wanted to thank you very much for this meeting to be held within the premises of the company within Węglokoks Capital Group, in which steel industry is a very important part. And ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of the 2000s, 2003, the EU, the largest market today, which is at the same time the most liberal market from the perspective of opportunity to enter the market worldwide, was a producer generating or producing clearly more steel than China. Starting 2005, China have been building their power, but also each and every new market is building its power, the market which is earning and to which funds are transferred from, among others, markets like the EU or the US. 2020 means production of about 200 million tons of steel within the EU, steel which is a construction material necessary for the sector of infrastructure, for construction, for excavation, and for practically each element, automotive sector. China, being producer of steel, exceed more than fivefold today, building their power over the recent 15 years as the largest factory in the world. This shows that actually over the recent 20 years, energy-consuming industry gradually has been being transferred to emerging markets who do not care about climate fees and often do not care about employees' rights. And this results in the fact that we as a capital group, but also as state treasury-owned companies and the whole metallurgical sector and steel processing sector in Europe, we are not capable of actually entering the true competitive war, fighting companies located in Brazil, Russia, or even China. I wanted to ask your attention at one more important aspect people are not keen on mentioning worldwide. The transport itself, logistics, and transporting a ton of steel produced in India leaves a giant carbon footprint at the same time. So on behalf of the whole capital group, but also the steel processing for us, it is a huge challenge, but we are also looking with great hope into the future at the mechanism which can result in machine industry, steel industry and processing industry being reborn in Europe, generating huge input into local budgets, regional budgets, but also generating huge amounts of jobs. Thank you. Thank you for this opinion, positively. And now let me ask Mr. Adam Gawenda, the MP, who is chair of the Parliamentary Commission for Transformation in Regions, to present initial conclusions, which we already may have after having read this resolution. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Prime Minister, Madam MP, and all gathered here, MPs and managers, we are really in a completely exceptional situation. Therefore, we must not avoid noticing the external conditions which are decisive or pointing at realization of this very important instrument CBAM is, because it cannot be treated as an individual one-off instrument, but as Madam Minister said, it is the huge range of activities Europe is facing. And looking at the situation in Europe, we in our Western neighbors can see decisions that the Greens are entering government, so to go away possibly fastest from coal, and that these elements which are significant for the EU will be introduced, and therefore we are in no doubt today that German policy is a policy which earlier used to be hidden undercover and implemented not quite very officially, not quite openly, but today it has a very measurable and clear character, which is to lead to federalization of the EU. But on the other hand, which is very positive, we also have our southern neighbors, the Czechs, who, as I trust, we will have really true partners in for implementation of our goals. And in all this, we set forth goals and objectives. And this is also that instruments, I would name them fiscal instruments, which are proposed in the EU, are instruments which are aimed at making Poland in a special way, because Poland is significantly dependent on fossil fuels, will still have to speed up in restructuring processes. And for us, a very important task here to look for solutions of the middle area. Mr. Prime Minister mentioned solutions which will allow us to, without losing our competitiveness, to be able to develop economy, which in Poland is to a great extent based on energy-consuming industry, heavy industry. And in this area, development or systemic changes in Upper Silesia have to be carried out in a very responsible way. A very difficult path is ahead of us, but a path which has to lead through looking for new technologies to solutions which will allow implementing our main economic goals. Our goals, because Europe, through these instruments, will lose competitive capacity, will lose all these elements through which European community was being established and through which we became one of member states implementing our economic goals. In my opinion, today, Silesian transformation must be based on common sense, on rational solutions, and we should, making use of R&D institutes and utilizing our knowledge and experience, and we have excellently developed background in this area, to create a path which will allow Poland and Silesia not losing its competitiveness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. MP has touched upon the topic of mining, so important here in Silesia. So now let me ask a comment on CBAM from the president of Polish mining group, Polska Grupa Górnicza. 2 minutes as well, sir. Mr. Prime Minister, Madam Minister, ladies and gentlemen, 3.5 billion tons of coal manufactured by China per year. 60% in 1 megawatt hours are taxes on CO2. And for 2020, the negative trade balance between Europe and China is 180 80 billion euros. These are statistics which show us a certain map of Polish companies for the future. Future in which 80% of the electric and energy system is to be changed. Today, most of it is manufactured by coal, and 80% is manufactured by coal, so that needs to be changed within 30 years. Secondly, compete on global market for Polish companies, on the global market, where the energy from coal-based energy in a Chinese factory is not taxed, and that leads and builds the necessity, absolute necessity, to create such legal regulations which will include that unique situation of Poland in this respect, of Polish economy, that if you look at the structure of coal and the energy mix and compare it to coal occurring in other European countries, and the time within which we need to do this, our effort is 1.5 to 2 times higher in the same time than countries which are richer than us. All this means that all the efforts that we've listened about, this Polish economy pathway, are justified by numbers. Thank you, I've managed in time. Thank you, Mr. President, and allow me, although Mr. Chairman hasn't indicated the willingness to speak up, but a representative of the social side. We want to hear your voice as well, sir. So again, around 2 minutes. Thank you. I'll be brief. The idea of a tax on coal has been initiated in union, among unions, but the conditions at that time were different. A ton of emission was 15 euros, I believe. Now, taking into account this system and today's conditions, I think this tax is not a good idea for 2 reasons. First, what all the people before me said, if indeed it may happen that the pool of free allowances will be eliminated, then the effectiveness of the tax will be reversed to its objective. Ultimately, this will probably lead to a situation in which everything will be more expensive, ultimately. That's first of all. Secondly, I really doubt, and Mr. Prime Minister is more knowledgeable in this respect here, that for all these huge economies, huge economic powers that impose onto Europe, including its dependence, for them to agree to such a tax. And even if they agree to such a tax, then let's be honest, the Chinese economy is not a democratic economy. So they will find elements of subsidizing, which will sooner or later create a negative effect of this tax. If I can propose anything, I will speak in the spirit of Mr. Prime Minister and the Minister. I think the opportunity for the economy of Poland and the EU economy, the opportunity lies in the deep reform of the ETS system. There is a similar system in Australia, so a system of incentives, which is based on companies emitting over a decade a certain amount. If they emit more, then they pay more than a certain amount, that they pay more for this emission. Once they increase their emissivity, they pay even more. And I think that can be a pathway to, let's say, normality in terms of climate. So I believe that this tax will ultimately, in the entire economy, especially for the society, would be a negative solution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These were the political voices which were on both sides, so both on the pro side and on the con side. We don't have a good solution yet. Mr. Prime Minister, maybe let's sum up what we've heard. I think the best summary will be to say that the devil lies in the details, and we don't know all the details yet. So depending on how certain details will play out, CBAM can be beneficial to industrial economies such as Poland or Czechia or Germany, but there are different objectives taken into account there which are dominating. So I'd rather talk about Central Europe, which is based on the community of objectives. So my first point of comment would be that we need to learn about the details of the provisions. Secondly, Polish industry cannot be deprived of free allowances, and that needs to be a condition. Without that condition, it will be difficult to go on. Thirdly, and we've heard that in some of the presentations in Mr. Kolor's speech as well, so the issue related to the support of inflation processes through improper activities on the regulatory side. Already today, we are experiencing a situation that through price manipulations on the gas market, the ultimate final price of gas has grown considerably on the market. To that, we have cost of CO2 allowances, and all that contributes to a major contributing element impacting the prices of various services and products in the EU. So we can say, and it's good to hear this at a conference like this, and I think it's good for Europe to hear this, that today, as a result of price manipulations and the ETS system, we have an increased inflation in Europe, much more increased in Germany, France, Spain, especially the US. The inflation has the biggest since for 28, 30 years. Also in Poland, it's been the highest since 20 years. Also because the prices of products and services includes very high cost of the climate policy of the EU and elements related to price manipulations on the side of Gazprom. So summing up all these very interesting voices that we've heard, it's good that we look at this carbon tax through the opinion of the interests of Poland, Czech Republic, and Central Europe, and depending on its shape that will be proposed by the European Commission, we should either support it or very much not support it. Today, we don't have sufficient data yet to clarify our position, but let's remember the two basic elements which are dominating in the world. On the one hand, inequality of price related to the fact that in one economic system, meaning the EU, the ETS system, it works, and in other economic systems, it doesn't work. So with that in the back of our mind, it doesn't exist at all. So with that in the back of our minds, we should also try to level the playing field. And secondly, a huge dependence of the entire European Union, especially of Poland, on the import of energy resources. Now, becoming independent on this improves our payment balance, but also our current balance by 60 up to 80 billion zlotys. So, an amount with unimaginable perspective for today. If we managed over 10, 20 years to shift this pendulum to the benefit of Polish, yes, the benefit would be huge. So bearing in mind and having in the back of our hands these strategic discourse, but also the detailed issues related with the here and now of the Polish economy, of the here and now of Silesia, and the here and now of Polish employees, workers. This is how we will approach the final shape of the carbon tax. Thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Prime Minister and Madam Minister very much, and the remaining speakers who've voice their opinions in the first political part, I can promise, as the rapporteur in the Commission, very strict cooperation and close contact so that we can prepare very good amendments. I'm meeting with various stakeholders and I'm listening to opinions on the CBAM, and I hope that our Commission, our ITE Commission, will have a positive, will bring a positive effect and positive opinion, which today, together with the ENVI Commission, the negotiations and trilogy, that will allow us to shape this regulation in a way so that it does not do no harm in particular. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, very much. Thank you, Madam Minister, very much. And please join us at the table. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I will invite the experts. So let me ask Mr. Krzysztof Stańczyk, Mr. Professor, to present an expert opinion on the use of carbon footprint in building the climate strategy of businesses. And to join me on stage, let me ask Mr. Professor Tomasz Ingram and Mr. Marcin Baron, PhD, to accompany me here on the stage. The floor is yours, gentlemen.
Welcome, Professor. Once again, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your participation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having invited me to this conference, Madam Chairman. And I wanted to present to you a brief presentation on the role of carbon footprint in defining the strategy of a company. Although I do not see the screen, but I think I will be able to move it. So let me start from a basic sort of activities carried out now worldwide, and what it started from 1980 and appointing an international team for climate changes, and then Kyoto Protocol, which was not very successful, and the countries which took up the obligations have not been fulfilled. And then we have the Paris Accord, so climate ambitions with the ambition not to exceed 2% compared to the pre-industrial era. And now Glasgow this year, further obligations, among others, a relatively big stress on getting away from coal quite fast. And in the climate objectives, Polish objectives are fitted in a national plan on climate, and here we have obligations like ETS being entered by further areas of economy, like 14% of biofuels in transport system. This is also a highly ambitious goal and very difficult to be implemented, and also increasing energy efficiency. All this being background to what I would like to discuss, and I will talk carbon footprint and climate strategies of the companies. And on top of that, we have national plan regarding energy and climate, where we can see that both the number of terawatt hours which we will be generating from fossil fuels will be decreasing significantly, and installed capacity in carbon coal-fueled power sector will be going down. This is the plan until 2040. And the emission trading system, well, there is the free allowances and paid allowances, and free allowances cover 40% of this is mainly power sector, district heating and industry. We have funds for it from the Green Deal and Just Transformation in order to get transformed, to gradually go away from fossil fuels. and to start using fuels mainly from renewable energy sources and also the nuclear energy and to reduce the carbon footprint more and more. And on top of that, tightening of the policy Fit for 55, so target of neutrality and inland transport goes in, a significant element in CO2 emissions, the sea transport and construction, and what the debate is on today, the carbon duty on borders of the EU. So treating power-consuming, energy-consuming industries so that European producers have equal chances. It seems that it is a good solution, although, of course, with certain buts, with certain elements which have to be worked on into more detail. Here I specified benefits and weaknesses of the CBAM. Well, benefits, it's equalizing if it is, of course, provided it is implemented correctly, if there are no cases of going away, like Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kloc mentioned that subsidized economies will find a way to bypass the system. And weaknesses, it's among others difficult liquidation of free allowances, free pool of ETSs, and here it is a question of in what sequence to do it, how quickly to go away from ETSs, and how quickly to give up the system at all. Now let me move on to definition of the carbon footprint. Carbon footprint, it is something, it is the total of emissions and greenhouse gases which are generated in total production of the given product, and it is converted into actually equal amount of CO2. Well, it is calculated in the whole life cycle of the given product. We say from cradle to grave, so from the moment when the product was designed until it was gotten rid of, liquidated. So here we are saying carbon dioxide, but there are situations where we are emitting other greenhouse gases. There are more of them. The main greenhouse gas is steam, as we know, but we are not taking it into account in all these systems. But quite significant from our perspective are, well, from Upper Silesian, are emissions of methane on excavating hard coal. It is methane or nitrogen oxide. Methane influences the environment and it's warming up more than CO2. And NOx's actually have much greater effect. Regarding carbon footprint, we have worked out already standards and rules for carrying out such studies and such evaluation, how a product, how a company influence generation of the carbon footprint. And there is ISO 14064 specifying how it is done in a company, and another standard specifying how it is done for a product. There is a way of reporting, a way of evaluating, generally assumed, and this is subject to verification by institutions who are authorized for that. And practically every product or every company can be subjected to such evaluation. And there are two options. The first option, carbon footprint for an organization. So, for example, for the whole colliery, I'll give you an example in a moment. Here we are doing it in three scopes for a company. The indicator of emission of greenhouse gases, the first one is directly caused by the company. For example, CHP, or in case of a coal mine, it is CHP if it is on the premises of the colliery, plus methane, which is generated in the colliery. Another scope, it is indirect emissions of of greenhouse gases. That means coming from all what we are buying: electrical energy, steam, heat and cooling. Here, well, you can verify by invoices how much it did cost us, and at the same time knowing from what source we are buying electricity, from what source we are buying heat, you can calculate also the footprint of such activity. And the third scope, deepest and full, comprehensive, is related to all other indirect emissions which are generated in a given organization as a result of purchasing equipment and using them. For example, in our institute we use technical gases and laboratory glass, and we buy computers, printers, toners, paper, and all that is within the scope which can also be taken into account in order to calculate the full carbon footprint for the given institution. Regarding reporting, you can report it in any free scope on your own if the institution wants to organize it by itself, and it is capable to do it at the first two stages. If they would like to have full carbon footprint which they can present to the outside, then the third scope is rather needed. The second option is carbon footprint for a product, and here also there is a standard specifying how to calculate carbon footprint for a specific product. It can be done, as mentioned here, from cradle to grave. That means from the very start, from designing and raw materials until liquidation, but this carbon footprint can also be ended up on the gate, for example. So companies producing, well, for example, we want to know what carbon footprint results from a ton of coal produced at Piasto-Ziemowicz coal mine, and such carbon footprint is demanded of our clients more and more often. There are also questions already. It is related to PGG also, where the customer wants to know what carbon footprint results from the coal they want to buy. In order to calculate the carbon footprint, we involve LCA method, life cycle assessment. This is analysis of the whole life cycle, from obtaining raw materials, processing them, that means generating the product, distribution, use, because it happens that using generates much greater carbon footprint compared to generation, and end of life, liquidation, or recycling or scrapping of the given product. And all these elements actually comprise the total footprint which each commodity, each good we want to produce actually leaves on the environment. And the example of a colliery here, we did make such elaborations already, but I think that it's time to intensify them. Regarding hard coal mine, we take into account building the mine, building the shaft and fronts and all the infrastructure, underground, overground, and then we take into account all elements which we supply in progress of coal excavation. We take into account the ventilation air which has to be pumped into the colliery, the heat which has to be brought to shafts. All these elements are taken into account here, and also we have to take into account energy, raw materials which we supply during production, excavation, on the go when excavating coal, and the end product is commercial coal and, for example, methane from the colliery, if we can, of course, sequestrate the carbon and utilize it. If we are not doing this, and rather than that we just simply do airing of the mine and actually get rid of methane in the exhaust air, then we leave quite considerable footprint. And calculating it all in detail, we may say what is the carbon footprint from excavation of 1 ton from a specific colliery. And here are factors determining the carbon footprint and examples of reducing it. Let's take emissions of methane. Fortunately, in most methane-containing mines, methane is being utilized, and generally it is being combusted in engines, combustion engines, so it is converted into CO2. So this carbon footprint actually drops down 24-fold compared to just releasing it into atmosphere. Storage of waste, you can use them in electrical energy, in energy audit, and careful look at what is perhaps possible to be saved on in the colliery, or other sources of electricity other than those from the mine. And this is, well, less realistic here in our conditions, but there are also ways available to reduce the carbon footprint. Consumption of fossil fuels, also low emission fleet, more and more often actually vehicles are used which consume less fuel. And next example is production of a personal car. It is not organization, but a specific product rather than that. And here, life cycle phases, it's designing the car, production, exploitation, and end of its life. So practically here we have, in case of cars, we have two cycles, a production cycle and exploitation cycle. And in case of vehicles, production cycle costs, well, I did not fit it in here, but it's about 4 tons of CO2 emissions. So, because on the entry we have production of aluminium, steel, plastics, various construction materials, all this results in emissions of 4 tons of CO2 on producing car. But during exploitation, when we travel 100,000 kilometers and use 700 cubic meters, well, we generate about 20 tons of CO2, so many times more than during production of the car. So this is an example of a product which during exploitation consumes most or leaves greatest carbon footprint, and then end of exploitation, scrapping, and possibility to utilize those parts which had been used here. There are also factors determining carbon footprint and possible ways of reducing it. And of course, regarding engines, we know that we are shifting towards engines consuming less and less fuel. It used to be 8 liters per 100 kilometers, then 6, hybrids 4.5 now, or 4 liters per 100 kilometers. Well, electric engines, but in those, depending on from where electricity is taken from, this carbon footprint can be calculated and determined, and it may not be lower compared to hybrid engines. Well, regarding the stage of production, well, it's well known, lighter materials, more plastic elements used, which are probably less, generating less carbon footprint, but this needs to be calculated precisely, and then we can see that whether activities seemingly ecological are really ecological, or they only seem to be such, and leaving still higher carbon footprint. Carbon footprint is a way to maintain competitiveness. What we are discussing here at this conference, carbon footprint and ecological footprints in the delivery chain, may enforce, maybe a tool enforcing, adhering to specific emission limits from suppliers from outside Europe. Such carbon footprint is a guidance for suppliers in supply chain. Specific producers are being guided also by the carbon footprint regarding buying semi-products. So all these elements may influence competitiveness of a company and may be significant in its development. And they may participate in building climate strategy of a company. Here, what is this climate strategy? It is determining one's goals and the moment when they are completed, and then showing the world that one is going towards ecological side. Large corporations are doing this already. Apple, Google, Microsoft and others showed their climate strategies and declared their climate goals. And of course, these are examples of companies, mainly such which do not generate such huge carbon footprint, but with this vast number of customers, this carbon footprint seems quite significant. But there are companies like Siemens, Ford producing something, and they also declared their climate strategy and declared reducing carbon footprint. Financial inflow. Well, we know some banks do not want to fund energy-consuming industries. For example, Environmental Protection Bank approved their regulations stating that they will not give loans to such industries. Regarding Poland, we here also have examples of companies which are taking up climate strategy already, and they have exemplary objectives. I'm not specifying them, but in the maybe declaration that by 2030 we will reduce some specific emissions, and we will oblige our suppliers to also present their carbon footprint in the products we need for our end product. Like Lidl, Poland can choose suppliers of meat products or other ones who will show that their carbon footprint is lower compared to competitors, achieving neutrality, emission neutrality by 2030. Others, zero emission level of products, and others, neutralization of historic carbon footprint. This is an ambitious goal that stating that if I was producing something over 20 years and I generated 130,000 tons of carbon footprint, I want to actually reduce this down to zero now. It is not easy. Examples of activities specified in the climate strategies of companies have been specified on screen here. These are mainly those changes in heating, photovoltaics, solar collectors regarding generation of electricity, acquiring energy from renewable energy sources specifically, and of course a replacement of all equipment by energy saving ones, protecting forests, additional forestation. All these activities can be carried out, and one can shape their climate policy. Generally, for such climate policy of a company to be implemented, we start from evaluating the status quo, and then we identify the main points, most energy-consuming ones. We set forth ambitions, goals, and we say that until 2030 we will reduce emissions by 50%, for example, and we specify the deadline, and we select the technology to reduce the emissions. Benefits, as I mentioned, it's access to funding, financing, PR activities. Of course, the greatest benefit is the environmental benefit, that having such ambitions and such goals, we are really reducing emissions, and we somehow give an input to a micro degree to reduce the greenhouse effect. But all the other ones are derivatives of that, influencing the image of the company, and often they are needed by the fact that we are supplier of semi-products, for example. Then the end user, client, will ask what is our level of emissions when we produce the semi-products. Regarding Central Mining Institute, if it is interesting for you, I wanted to propose support in the implementation of activity like elaborating climate strategy of a company, or determining carbon footprint for a specific product we have appropriate software available and staff and experience in calculating LCA and carbon footprint and eco-efficiency, as well as in audits. And here we have examples of work already carried out, so I kindly invite you to cooperate with us. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Professor. It's indeed very interesting to see how detailed we need to have our approach to this regulation in order to be able to calculate who should pay what amount and how. Thank you, Professor, once again. And now let me invite Tomasz Igram and Marcin Baron. We have one stand only. I don't know how you'll cope with this. I will handle, don't worry. Thank you, Madam MP, Madam Chairperson. Thank you very much for the invitation and for bearing with us until our presentation. Now, following this micro approach, we will take you to the macro approach, and Tomasz will then bring you back to the micro level so that we can come back to recommendations and to show you where in particular we see the impact of CBAM. As it has been said already, we have been tasked with looking at this from different economic perspectives. We are in the middle of the process, therefore you see information to say that these are preliminary observations of the expert team, because we are in the process of formulating our recommendations, so we will finish with a certain invitation of sorts. But allow us to look at the macro level for a moment. To start off, I would like to put two starting points for you, which are not up for discussion, I believe. The first one is obvious. If we're discussing about this at all, it's because we see ourselves as the stakeholders of some climate policy. Some meaning one which improves the climate reality. The position of the Minister of Environment, Madam Minister, said we need to find this golden measure and we need to work out the solutions through dialogue which are beneficial to each party, and we need to meet in the middle. So the second starting point concerns standards of the World Trade Organization and the assumption that I think if we want to, hopefully without bigger conflicts, we want to introduce this instrument, then we need to agree to the fact that its introduction will, to a certain degree, lead to reduction or elimination of the free allowance pool. And I think these are our starting points or the premises of our discourse. Who is affected by CBAM? Because we, in the discussion, we're talking about a very general group of recipients. Many of the speakers before us have clearly stressed the role of the pilot stage, of this initial stage. And we would like to start off by narrowing this and showing who it pertains to. If you look at the importers of the assets of the goods that will be subjected to CBAM, if we in billions of euros, if we order them according to the Eurostat data, then the basic importer of materials that will be subject to CBAM, then we have Germany, Holland, France, Italy, Belgium, Spain, Poland, Ireland, Sweden, and the Czech Republic. We have the first 10 countries shown on the slide, but it also shows the role of Poles and the Czech Republic as the countries which in the EU27 have an important role as for the volumes or transactions of volumes who will be affected by CBAM and subjected to it in the first group. Let's look at certain other pieces of information very generally. It's always worth having a look at this, as the PGG president said, to have this anchor point in the discussion. We've referred to this slide as surplus of import, but as a driving force, as a stimulus or impetus to maintain the free pool as part of ETS. Very often, discussions on CBAM are not discussions revolving around whether such mechanism of leveling the playing field, as the Prime Minister said, whether it's needed or not. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President said that these discussions have been ongoing for years in different communities, but the stress point has changed on how the ETS works, how it is becoming a system which is not necessarily beneficial market-wise, and to what degree do we want to defend a sector without reducing the pool of free allowances. Why am I saying this with regard to this slide? Because we're showing the import surplus, so everything which is below zero on this chart is the export advantage. So we send out more. Then why is reducing allowances, free allowances, why does it hurt so much? Because we're exporting. We are the exporters here. We, as the EU, generally speaking, despite the fact that the market relations are changing, transfers to China, carbon leakage, all this is happening, but so far we are exporting the CBAM goods in a dominant or a majority manner. So we often have this effect, okay, CBAM would be good, the cement sector, the steel sector, but when we maintain free allowances, free emission allowances, which, as we've mentioned, won't necessarily work, so we need to find this golden measure. Now, look at the list and the summaries for the sub-CBAM groups. It's commonly said that the cement business rather supports the CBAM business, but look at the trade structure in the EU. Now, the key that we've selected here, we've selected the 5 most important countries, plus Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, where we had complete data for the years starting 2005 from our joining the EU. So these are data for these groups of countries. Sometimes we didn't have data for all of them, so we're not showing them in these cases. We're showing the biggest players on the market. Now, the cement business, like I said, is quite positive about CBAM because we have a huge import advantage to Europe. So there's a quick prevention mechanism. We believe the prevention is needed. The trade balance is not favorable to us as EU, so that sector is okay. Now moving on. Okay. So electricity. About this energy, I think the fewest things are least is spoken about this sector, but the biggest exporters are Germany and France, but there's a different energy mix there. So the dependence on coal in this case is completely different due to the scale of the energy mix to which we can arrive. And again, we could come back to what the Prime Minister said on becoming independent the external sources, but we need to bear in mind all the realities that we have, the reality that we're facing, together with the volumes of resources available. The next slide. Now, please don't necessarily pay attention to different expert opinions that you see. As for fertilizers and the steel sector that you'll see in the next slide, we have quite a big discrepancy in different expert expert opinions as to the data. Now, this stems from the fact that different groups analyze different subgroups of customs codes. For our analysis, we've taken what we have in the July regulations, the prices that have there. So we believe this to be quite a reliable image as for the discussion that we're having now. So look at the fertilizer industry that we've heard about in the Deputy Prime Minister of State Assets. He's spoken about this. As the EU, we're rather an exporter here. Poland is the bold line. Yeah, but this is the one you probably won't see that it's in bold. The largest countries here are Belgium and Holland, which have the highest export of materials in the group. And now something that we are much interested about is iron and steel. Here we're more close to zero than in the case of fertilizers. Germans have an export surplus. We as Poland are a bit above here. So please note that the game is for the aim is to not lose production capacity that we have. And aluminum is quite similar. The strongest importer here is Holland, if I recognize the colors well. And now certain dilemmas in brief. So this would be a midterm summary from a macro level. Yeah, so the first issue that we've wanted to notice is the issue that we often have this protectionism system. We said it in realities like with the fading out of ETS, but we don't have guarantees that if this does not happen, then we will due to the image of industries highly dependent on coal that will lose the competitive advantage in EU. We assess that there is a risk that will approach this from the other side, that will secure the old industries, and on the other hand, certain portion of production will still leak out due to the ETS. And I'll refer again to what the Madam Minister of the Environment said, that if we do not look at it as a whole picture, this will always be a partial solution. It's like in a sieve full of holes that everything will leak out. Secondly, very important from the economic standpoint, as of now, I think we can say without any speculative fears, risk that CBAM can be affected by the same thing. I don't think this should be an argument against such way of thinking, but I think this is one of the most important arguments that should be factored in when discussing how this market should be managed so as not to fall into such trap. The impact on innovation, the next issue, as we've heard in the professor's speech a moment ago, it will be good for all these systems to inspire us to certain innovation, but we have a phenomenon such borders of innovation in certain sectors, and one thing that is not spoken much about now, please note that when CBAM would be expanded, so the pool of assets included in assets would expand by the semiconductors that we've heard so much about in the context of the IT and automotive industry. And please note that once EU locates most of our production on external markets, then if the CBAM pool is expanded, then ironically, we, by preserving the old industry, we will undermine the modern one because it is much more dependent on deliveries from the outside. Of course, if we talk about shortening the value chains, well, we can discuss on how much we can do this in the EU, but for now, let's say this doesn't exist. Another thing, like a humanist problem, the issue of so-called global South countries, so global poor countries, which communicate, okay, others have been given the opportunity to develop within different periods of economic growth, and now when the countries have potentially the opportunity to chase up to the rest, we're taking away those opportunities. The second issue here is the issue of what is referred to as the yellow jackets, energy yellow jackets, as the result of those mass protests in France with regard to the increase of fuel sales. That led to now we have energy price increases. We've talked about the various sources. Mr. Prime Minister mentioned a lot about this. This is one of the elements that CBAM, to which CBAM can add a negative element. Another risk that we should mitigate somehow, in our opinion, is the potential elusiveness of operations of other countries. Those of you who've delved into the provisions of this regulation, I think you quite aptly know that the European Commission proposes releasing some countries from CBAM and a mechanism that will allow for reducing CBAM for countries that are applying standards similar to ETS. And you can follow this in the international press. Immediately, all the governments of important economies said, yeah, we have that. So if you can, let's say you can have some trust to Australia or the US, but if you hear that the Chinese and Russians are declaring this as well, then I would be careful as to the degree to which these systems will be coherent with our very high EU aspirations. Sometimes some people say too high, but this is the role, as the Madam Minister said, this is the place where the EU should play this role in the global system. And last but not least, the issue of considering the individual carbon footprint. We've heard so much about this in the professor's speech. I don't want to come back to this issue. This is the issue of calculating, and you see the obligation to ensure that declared emissions have been achieved, and that slowly brings us to the micro level, to the business level. And as I've said, we will, at the beginning, we will return from the macrosphere to the microsphere. And now, Professor Ingram. Okay, Mr. Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcin said nearly everything, and I think almost everything has been said, but allow me to just go over a couple of points and discuss certain cost points which will be very impactful from the point of view of businesses, and I think it will affect all of us. First, businesses will be forced to buy certificates. That's an additional position that we don't have in our cost portfolio as of now. The second thing worth remembering is the fact that we will need to devote time and attention to preparing conclusions and reports and motions, annual reports on our operations in this respect. These are the costs of obtaining reliable information about emissions related with, especially with the products that we are importing. These are costs of verifying declarations of our suppliers, costs of penalties and fees in case of surrendering a suitable amount of certificates, and all organizational costs. So that is a group of costs which is directly linked with introducing new solutions, and these are costs that will be borne by businesses. And now I wanted to note that this is a group of costs directly related. But in my opinion, and the opinion of our entire team, discussion about CBAM is discussion about search for a type of alternative. So we're involved in the debates that Marcin talked about at the beginning. We're authentically involved. Then we have the environment in mind, the benefit of the environment in mind. The idea of improving the status of the environment, that makes us try to redefine the approaches and the ways we do things. What I would like to encourage you and what we encourage people to do, and what we ourselves will do, is an attempt to make a map of consequences of introduced solutions related to CBAM. From the point of view of businesses, what can, as of now, be seen in categories, short-term categories, because we're looking for the upcoming years. And please note that in the longer run, this will be a consequence of rebuilding, for example, supply chains, probably the consequence of, in the form of providing a certain stability, resource stability for the needs of executing current production. And what we're aiming at is that we cannot stop at this level, because all these changes, all these innovations that will be introduced, both at the beginning and in the end, the cost will be borne by the consumers, because the cost will be put on them, including households. But this will all fit into the economy. And as Marcin said, we're starting with the macrosphere, but eventually we'll get to the micro level as well. The foundation of the operation of modern economies lies in businesses. Politics and policies are intended for improving the functioning of those economic businesses, for it to be as cohesive as possible, and for it to be serve the benefit of all. Now the question to you: to what degree are you ready to search for alternatives and solutions? From my position, I think those are ready for changes who have accumulated capital in the recent years for such change to happen. From this perspective, EU, US or Australian businesses, which have been mentioned oftentimes, are from the financial and resource standpoint ready for that. What about us? And that is the question I want to leave you with. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. I am really grateful to you, Mrs. Experts, because it is a different, new look, not from a political perspective and very much in detail. And as Mr. Prime Minister said, all is actually included in details. So now let me announce, no, I should not announce the break, should I? So we are waiting for our guest, and now perhaps maybe somebody from the participants from the floor would like to take from the audience would like to take the floor. We have 6 minutes available. Is there anyone? I must admit that we are now at the European Parliament at the stage of preparing opinions in individual commissions. These are two main responsible commissions, ENVI and ITRE commissions, who will be preparing opinions and then a report for the proceedings of the European Parliament. I have carried out the whole series of meetings with actors and sectors interested in, with the aluminium industry, and with chemical industry, with power sector, and now I'm gathering all comments and proposals for corrections and adjustments, and I will ask all of you also, so that the opinion which I have to present to ITRE Commission, where voting on amendments will take place, to be possibly most supportive for European industry and for people, because this is most important challenge for us. And of course also one has to take into account the fact that there is a group of the Greens in European Parliament, very active, and they are those who first of all are stressing on getting rid of free allowances. This is their main flagship to go for zero-emission economy in Europe, possibly soonest, which from Upper Silesian perspective is really difficult to see. But we must take into account that ITRE Commission will be focused more industry-wise, but knowing my colleagues from ENVI Commission, they will have very fierce struggle from the side of our EU MPs and European conservatives and reformists, so that from this Commission proposals come which will be relatively satisfactory. From the negotiations we have in progress today, the struggle is not about for the free allowances to be or not to be, but how late they will be eliminated. And this is what, first of all, we have to focus on. And therefore, I asked here from Upper Silesia, I asked experts who will give me some very specific facts for the debate, for the discussion in the Parliament and on the Commission, first of all, and then in the Parliament. And later, well, of course, it needs a long way until that resolution is passed. However, the time we got is very short. Until the 10th of February, we have to file these prepared amendments for translation. So difficult work, especially in this winter and Christmas time. It will be hard work to prepare a proposal which will be already partly negotiated with other political groups, where we can look for supporters, of course, partly at European public party and this very conservative ID. Well, we will see how Renew, the Liberals, will behave. I do hope that ITRE Commission has always been so responsible as to always be able to break through this strong blow from the leftist green part. Even, I must admit, my colleagues from Poland, from the Commission, from the left-wing side, behaved in a positive way towards us. I may mention the coking coal. I'm looking at Mr. President of JSW. We recently had a success in Parliament last week. There was voting for this strategy on critical raw materials, and in this strategy we managed to introduce to it such amendments, such solutions which place also JSW. Well, I would like it to be heard here in this audience as a very positive, beneficial side, but our long-awaited guest is with us, a representative of European Commission, Vincent Eduardo, head of European Commission. So I mentioned Mr. Director knows everything about CBAM, General Directorate for Taxation and Customs Union. He knows everything, so we do count upon taking into account all comments. We will prepare a resume from this conference, which will be sent to you, Mr. Director. And now, Mr. Director, CBAM as a tool in the hands of European Commission. Welcome, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dzień dobry, everyone, and sorry for not having participated from the beginning and for keeping you waiting. I had other commitments and engagements. But I mean, it's a pleasure for me for being here, and I'm really happy for being invited. And I'm also very pleased that Mrs. Ko took the initiative to organize this type of events, because I think it's really very, very important that we explain, or we are able to explain to the big audience internally and also externally, the European Union, what the CBAM is. Much has been said so far, and I understand that also in this event this morning, so I will not go into the details. You know what the objectives are. We are talking about an environmental measure. It's not a measure intended to be or to protect the competition or the competitiveness of EU producers, but it's clear that in one way or another it will have an impact. If you look at the design of the measure, of course, the measure is mirroring the ETS as much as possible. And for that reason, what we intend is to make sure that we will deal with the risk of carbon leakage with third countries. So the risk that there will be an incentive to delocalize EU enterprises, EU companies into countries or into countries which have a more lenient climate policies than in comparison with the European Union, or in any case to make sure that also the goods that come to our border will play the same rules as the goods produced in the European Union. So we have an ETS in place, an emission trading system, which is very ambitious and will be more and more strict in the future as we approach our targets of 2030 and 2050. And it's fair and it's of course reasonable that we can expect the same from goods from third countries. I will not go into the details because I suppose that the audience is already familiar with the proposal that was adopted as part of the Fit for 55 package on the 14th of July. Maybe what may be more of interest on your side is to know where the discussions are going on at this moment. The Council has already started discussing the proposal. There was already a first reading of all the articles in the Council working group, and now the French Presidency from January they want to, of course, launch a deep debate in order to be able to have a common position or a negotiating position by June 2022. That fits very well also with the progress in the European Parliament, starting with the report that will be discussed this afternoon in the INTA committee on the CBAM's proposal. The Parliament also wants to have a vote on their negotiation position in June. So both institutions should be ready to launch the trilogues already from July, and the Commission will be very pleased to help and to participate in these discussions. At this stage, we of course stick to our proposal, but we are listening to the two institutions. What I can tell you that as expected, the main issues that have been raised are the compliance with the WTO rules. I have to say that if you look at the design of the measure, you will understand that what we have put on the table is in full compliance with WTO rules, but also with free trade agreements, with our customs union with Turkey, and also with other international engagements and arrangements, like, for example, also the Paris Agreement. As I said before, the measure is an environmental measure. We intend to push third countries also to embrace the same level of ambition or a very similar level of ambition as we do. Many countries are already doing that. Many countries have announced also carbon neutrality by 2050. And since we announced the CBAM, we can see that there has been some inertia and some push in third countries in order to move quickly. We are, of course, in close contacts with the main trade partners. The risk of retaliation has been raised very often, and I hear also from the industry their fears that this could dismantle or bring a trade dispute at international level. Just to let you know that we are, of course, talking to many trade partners, Canada, US, Russia, Japan, South Korea, Australia, China. I mean, we are, of course, very much interested in letting know or explaining the content of the CBAM. We are also in contact with interinstitutional or international institutions such as the G20, the G7, the OECD, which is very much interested also in discussing these measures and carbon pricing. And of course, we are about to meet with Mrs. Ngozi in the WTO in order to also engage at that level. One of the concerns also raised, of course, is the competitiveness of the EU industry. the concerns with the introduction of a CBAM measure and the impacts it will have on the EU industry. As you know, the CBAM is supposed to be a complementary measure to the ETS. As we increase the level of ambitions, we know that free allowances will have to go. And of course, we understand that the CBAM will be a good complement to deal with the risk of carbon leakage. So far, free allowances have been in the system in order to deal with that risk. And of course, as we increase this level of ambition, we know that free allowances in one way or another will have to go. We think that the temporary or the way how we see the implementation of the CBAM, which a temporary application from 23 to 25 in order to collect information, and then full application from 26 for the onwards or in the future, with a gradual phase out of free allowances in 10 years, we think it's quite balanced. It gives the right signal and it gives the possibility for all stakeholders, including the EU industry, but also the EU administrations and the administrations in third countries and exporters, in order to adapt to the new CBAM. We expect also the third countries will do their part. They will introduce measures in the future so that in one way or another, they will also be introducing carbon pricing and hopefully at the same level as the carbon pricing in the European Union. The transitional period also will give us the chance to look at the scope of the measure in terms of sectors. I understand that there is a lot of interest in knowing whether this measure will be extended already in 2026 to the sectors which are not covered for the moment, and in particular to downstream sectors. That will be part of the analysis, and the Commission will come with a report by the end of 2025 or middle of 2025 in order to assess all these issues. The same goes for the scope in terms of emissions. So far, we are only intend to cover the direct emissions, but of course, we are aware of the fact that indirect emissions, for example, from the production of electricity or from the transport, are also very relevant. So that's something that we will be analyzing also in the next years, and we hope to come with some ideas in the report of 2025. With that, I think that I cover more or less the most important things that I can say in 10 minutes in relation to the CBAM. And thanks again for the invitation and for allowing me to reaching out to the Polish industry and to the Polish citizens who might be very much interested in the application of the CBAM. Thank you very much again, Mrs. Courts, and we will keep in touch.
Ja bardzo dziękuję panu dyrektorowi.
Thank you
Mamy
very
stanowisko
much.
Komisji
So we have the
Europejskiej,
position of
mamy
the European
rozporządzenie,
Commission,
które
we have the
przygotowała
regulation
Komisja Europejska. W tej
prepared
chwili
by the
czeka
European
nas
Commission.
ogrom pracy w Parlamencie
A lot of work ahead of us
To
in the European
spotkanie
Parliament.
dzisiaj poniekąd
This
przygotowuje
meeting
nas,
today is
europosłów,
preparing us,
tego, aby
European MPs,
przygotować taki
to
projekt opinii,
prepare
szczególnie w
such
Komisji
a
ITRE,
draft
aby ona
opinion in the ITRE
była opinią
Commission
do przyjęcia zarówno
for
przez
it,
przemysł,
so that it can
jak
be
i
acceptable
tych,
by the
którzy
industry,
zajmują się dzisiaj
as well as
bardzo
those
mocno klimatem, ochroną
who today
środowiska.
deal with the
Wiemy,
climate
że
and
kwestia
environmental protection
CBAM-u
very
to
much. We
nie
know
jest
that the issue of CBAM
mechanizm
is not
zero-jedynkowy, dobry
a
albo
black and
zły.
white mechanism. It's
Tutaj
not either good or
wszystko
either
zależy
bad.
od szczegółów,
Everything
które
depends on
wypracujemy
the details that we work out together with the European Commission, with the Council of the European Commission. A lot of work is ahead of us. Thank you very much for your opinions. Thank you again to the Prime Minister, Mr. Mateusz Morawiecki, to Minister Anna Moskwa. Thank you to the European MPs who have taken the floor. But let me thank especially the experts who I hope will continue to work with me and you on preparing the best possible opinion for the ITRE Commission and for the European Parliament. Thank you very much, and I would like to thank the media as well for the direct streaming, to the journalists for the relations, and to all of you. Join me for some conversation.